So we have back on the show, John Scaife. Hello, John.
Hey, good to see you again, Vic.
Yeah, it's good to see you. It's been a while. Um, okay, so you've been on before, so it might be an idea just to sort of fill out a little bit about what you've been doing so people know who you are, what do you do?
Who am I? What do I do? I try to walk on both sides of the road. I've got quite a serious business background, which I'm reluctant to let go of because I sort of know that business mentality drives a lot of the way we all live our lives. And at the same time, I've spent 30 years studying with First Nations teachers um, who would say there is a world other than the world that we can see and
Hmm.
put Mother Earth in the middle of it. And so I juggle that path and I have businesses and contacts and talks that, I tailor to fit.
Hmm. So what have you been doing recently in that sort of vein?
I spent a lot of time this year bringing forward grief rituals, which people say, yeah, great that you're doing this work. And then they get a little bit close to and find it's quite scary when they realize that they're sitting under their own mountain of grief. But it's work that I've known for about 30 years from a teacher called Malidoma Somé, who came from Burkina Faso and was sent by his elders to bring that wisdom to this land. He came to the West and realized how incapable we were of expressing grief. I think Martine Prechtel, who's another person I've studied with, sort of talks about, we have a culture which doesn't understand grief and isn't very friendly to grief. So I've spent a lot of time with somebody called Catherine Edwards, with 20 or 30 people in a village hall and a drum and three or four, and three shrines talking about why we're crying, what we're carrying, what we're holding, and making a place for grief. And it's powerful work and it's good work, and people always go away looking 10 years younger afterwards.
Hmm.
So that's been a big part of a big part of what I've been doing, a big part of what I'm doing. I've got another one up in Newcastle, 2 3 days time. So excited by all of that.
So when you say grief, when you use that term, obviously people have a particular resonance to that in in society, that it's something that you don't really want, if you see what I mean. It's something that we try to sanitize a lot of things. Is that a fair sort of comment that we tend to do that in this society?
I look at it from a historical perspective, which is that we've been a warrior nation a very long time, and you can't cover the world in pink British Empire and be crying for your dead buddy at the same time. So we've
That's a very good
created,
point.
so we've created a culture where it's not appropriate to express grief. In fact, to express grief is to acknowledge the enemy has got one up over you, which is to betray the death of your buddy. So it's a very subtle thing that's going on. Um, and so yeah, and then we have this big boys don't cry culture, which makes it even harder for blokes. But again, this is all about not making time for grief. Uh, and I think the polite society bit is a way of saying, don't you dare start getting emotional, because then I'll start getting emotional and I will be overwhelmed and don't know what to do with it. And I'll make a fool of myself crying in public. So there's
That's a
a
very
whole
good point.
pile of mores we're stepping into here, which
Mm.
are long and established in this country and other countries as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's very interesting. This sort of people being very uncomfortable being around people that are uh, well suffering any form of emotion, really. Um,
I mean,
we
it's
aren't going to.
changing. It is
It is
changing.
changing. Yes, it is changing, and I think there is a recognition that um, that the way that we've dealt with the dying process, where it's almost like we've removed ourselves from it. And it's not that we didn't deal with that in the past and have a sort of some sort of relationship with death and dying within families, but we've become increasingly worse at it over a period. I don't know whether that's, I don't know, is that just after the Second World War? It's difficult to say, isn't it?
It's very complicated because it operates at so many levels. If everybody's
Mm.
going to heaven, why are you upset that they're dead? You know, that's the sort of that's the
Yes,
underlying sort of vibration, which is,
yes,
which is there. Um, and then there's just the need to put food on the table. So you know you got to get back down the mill tomorrow morning. You haven't got time to take a week off to cry.
yeah,
Uh, and I think really what shifted it here, sadly, was the Lady Diana dying. So I see
yes,
that as really the first testimony to public grief
yes.
that
I
we've
think
had
that's a
in our
very good
culture.
point. Yeah, yeah, because that was very un-British, that response, wasn't it? If you think back to that event.
Well, I think the head of the Church of England said at the time when Elton John started playing "Candle in the Wind" and everybody stood up. It was like, oh, we missed something here.
Mm, exactly, exactly. Um, that's fascinating because I hadn't thought of, well, at the time I realized something had changed, I suppose, but it looking back at it, that was very much a pivotal point that I could, now you've pointed that out. I think that's very true. And we've got now this well, certainly they were doing this in Europe anyway for a long time, where people would like the sort of wayside shrine type of thing, where people would start marking places where there'd been accidents, and with flowers, and uh, and that only really started seemingly after Diana.
Mm.
Interesting, interesting. So when you this is a tricky question to answer, I know, but how does how do you do a grief ritual? Um, be as vague as you want, but you know,
As
there's
vague
just
as
sort
you
of the
want.
outline of what it
And
is that
I
you're
think
doing.
we invite people. I always sort of, people are there. The, by the time you get to people in a room, they've stepped through some of the first wall of fear, which is, oh, that's a good idea, and then looking up at what feels like a huge dam of water about to come down and wash them away, and they've stepped through that fear. So
Mm,
grief is already present in the room. So we say to people, what is the horse that you rode in on? Um, and sometimes it's a big grief, like a loss of a family member. Sometimes it's just like a life is hard and it's been hard a long time grief, and a whole range of everything in between: illnesses, feeling displaced and not having a home in the world. And so we do some sort of what you might call conventional sharing. And one of the big understandings is that you can't cry by yourself. It's too damned overwhelming. So we spend some time building up community through sharing. And then it's based on Dagara cosmology of earth, water, nature, fire, and mineral. So we bring those elements into the room by creating, you call them shrines, call them places you decorate where that energy can be held. And then in the afternoon, we will dance and sing and create a time and a space for people to express their feelings. And because we are not doing this as a psychological exercise, and we will have called in the help of ancestors, who are very big, much part of a community. Um, and because we've called in for help to do what we cannot do by ourselves and find overwhelming by ourselves, um, people end up stepping into grief in a way they haven't normally encountered it before. And we will sing and we will dance for 2, 3 hours, and people will go to a grief shrine and come back to a place we've designated around a fire we've designated as the village hearth. And they're welcomed back because what they've done is a huge and amazing achievement. Um, and everybody is there for everybody else. So that's the community side of it. Nobody's going to step into a dark cave knowing there's a bear at the end of it unless they've got tribe to pull them out of it. So that's really what we're doing. Um, and we do it as a ritual. We explain what a ritual is, and it's something radical. Where, to be frank, you don't know what's going to go down. You've got a rough shape of the way the ritual is going to go, but who's going to say what, express what, cry what?
Hmm.
Nobody knows. And at the end of it, everybody's like, "Wow, I wish I'd done that sooner."
Yeah. So this is interesting because um, thinking about the sort of the unconscious creative process about things, sometimes we think that all this stuff is just like, well, we can sit down and just do it in our head, but you can't actually. You have to make things physical, otherwise they still feel um, slightly intangible. And I'm quite interested in this idea that you're dancing and singing and making things happen emotionally. Um, would you say that? Oh, it's not saying is this the only way that you can do it, because it's not, obviously, but this is a very powerful way of dealing with that. I'm I'm assuming, because you could, if you think about the Western idea of dealing with grief, it's this sort of thing of chatting to somebody, and there's nothing really physical about that, is there? There's obviously the talking, but it needs to be more than that somehow, doesn't it?
I,
And I think that's something that we have lost, which is really what I think. You're,
I think we get frozen in our bodies, and so the dancing part is
yeah,
really important. And we're singing, so you're already making a sound.
yeah,
And it also, the sound and the drumming camouflages a little bit some of the self-consciousness about going,
yeah,
screaming and howling.
yeah,
Um, and what happens is some people will sense they have grief and not know what to do. And sometimes it's just like, make a noise.
yeah,
And they make a noise and suddenly it's there. I've been in situations where a man hadn't been able to grieve his mother for the 10 months that she'd been dead. And this was the role of women who used to keen, which is a
yes,
tradition which is we don't associate with this country, but it's coming back, I think, a little bit. There's some people doing it in Scotland I've been reading about. But that initial call, that initial invocation, which cuts right through, almost like a fingernails down the blackboard kind of feeling,
mm,
opens people up. And all of a sudden, one person's crying, then another person's crying. And because grief has been permissioned at the outset, there's none of that shh sort of vibe around it. And what we find and what we explain to people is that your body knows how to do this. I think that's the other bit which surprises people. I think part of why people don't cry at funerals is they're scared if they start, they'll not stop. But
yeah,
actually, our bodies know how to do this. It's one of the most natural things in the world. We're crying when we came out the womb. So what's so hard about it?
mm, mm. You're mentioning about keening, obviously for people who don't know what that is. Could you sort of describe that a little bit?
I could demonstrate how to do it, but it's a quite severe howling scream, like, "Ah!" sort of, and you get three or four women or a group of people doing that together, and it's just like, oh,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it's a
because
call.
that was very common, wasn't it, in the sort of Gaelic communities
Yeah,
and stuff. That was they'd bring somebody. They would even bring somebody in to keen,
yeah,
wouldn't they? But that sort of makes sense because there is, again, in a lot of traditional societies, you have a lot of that um, type of female singing or screaming or whatever that goes on
yeah.
in a process of well, particularly with grieving. I mean, it's something that you see in Africa quite a bit, and the Arabic nations do it as
Yeah.
well. And it's something we've sort of lost that. I mean, it was interesting. I was listening to some flamenco
Mm.
singing, and that's very, very similar to that sort of
Very
process.
close.
Very, very close. Um, and you think, well, it is about that sort of emotional release, but it's not. That sounds a bit sort of clinical, but it's not that at all. It's almost like, as you said, it's like sort of opening the doors to things. Um, and I just find that interesting that when people can, they naturally unlock stuff because they can do that. As you said, the body knows what to do.
Yeah.
So how how long does one of these rituals take then? It's over how many days?
I mean, the whole thing is modeled on a Daguerre funeral, which is a public event that happens over 3 days. Um, we have done them in the UK. Initially, we did them outdoors in 2 days. And what's happened now is people are unreluctant to commit to more than a day in their busy diaries, and
Yeah.
they don't want to be exposed to the English weather. So we've actually got this down to a 9 o'clock to 9 o'clock event in a village hall at the
Right.
moment. And next year
Right.
we will be doing some outdoor ones.
Yeah.
It's a matter of finding venues and having enough people enthusiastic about it. Um, but you can still go on quite a journey in that time.
Mm, mm. Yeah. And I could imagine if you had an outdoor environment that just allowed people to be out in the wild, that would be pretty amazing.
Well, the whole idea is that it's actually the trees that help support, the understanding that, the trees in these cultures and plants are gods and goddesses, and they're there to help us.
Yeah.
And they actually are eating what we cannot eat.
Yeah.
And so it's very, so that for some people may be a little bit much to chew on, to stretch the metaphor. Um, but we always bring flowers and vegetation into the shrine, even when we do it in a village hall,
Mm,
because it's not work we can do as humans just by
mm,
ourselves. So there is always
mm,
the invocation to nature and to the unseen world to help us lay down what we can't carry,
mm,
and it becomes food, compost, if you like, for the spirits in the other world.
mm. Yeah. So, a lot of this sounds, there is a sort of like an initiation aspect to this I'll put that in air quotes because it certainly takes you from one place to another. I mean, I know you do initiation type work anyway. Would you say that that's a
I think what it's about, the initiation part of it, is it's a very clear boundary marker.
mm,
Um, this person was here.
yeah,
This person is no longer here.
mm,
Grief is an expression of praise. The more you love somebody, the more you're going to be upset at their absence.
yes,
I had a life when this person was here. Now I have a life where this person is not here. There's a transition in the middle, and the more clearly sometimes that transition is marked, the easier it is to pick up the rest of the life which is available to you.
yeah,
And sort of all of those life stage processes, which could be a 13-year-old initiation, could be a kids have left the house initiation, could be a menopause initiation, could be a stepping into elderhood initiation. They're all things we don't do terribly well in our culture anymore,
no,
which once upon a time would have involved a whole community, and it would have been done with the support of nature. And you would have been treated differently, worn different clothes, had a different tattoo. In some cultures, you even knocked your tooth out when you've been initiated.
yeah,
It's quite a severe thing.
yeah,
And you can do the psychology on it, that you're a 13-year-old lad who used to hang around with mom in the kitchen, and suddenly you're a 13-year-old lad who hangs out now with the guys. And that's a very messy transition in our culture. In indigenous cultures, it's much more clear.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think you actually spoke quite a bit about this last time when we did a podcast. But there are so many things that have been lost in that. But you know, you could obviously even something like an apprenticeship system that we had was a form of initiation, really, for young men, and it always seems to be problematic for men because there aren't those physical things that women go through um, that mark their journey. Men seem to have a bit more of a problematic thing within this society. I don't know. There's there's something that you could sort of say about that because I know there's a lot of work that you've been interested in with doing with young men and fathers and sons.
I think it's really hard for guys right now. I don't want to make anything slight at all of the centuries of struggle that women have been through, and some are still in. But right now, if you were to sort of say who are the men that you admire in public, there's not many names come out. There's a lot more women come out.
Exactly.
Um, the suicide rates are highest for young men. The people in most of the people in prison are young men. Um, I grew up in the northeast of England in an age when work for a very large proportion of the population meant going down the pit or banging rivets in the shipyard.
Yeah.
D.H. Lawrence talks beautifully about the respect and the love that women felt for their men because they put food on the table with their physicality. And all of, when basically all you need is fingers and thumbs, all of that's gone.
Yeah.
I think right now men have got a real problem trying to identify what does it mean to be a man and what is manhood. And because there is a gap, you have false messages of manhood, aka Andrew Tate and people like that, stepping in with some sensible stuff and some not terribly good stuff at all, but enough of a thing for somebody who's a young man who's looking for something to hang on to,
Yeah.
and then get sucked into all of the rest of it, which is um, it's something that, and I think it's also something that's difficult culturally for men to address as men, because a collective of women is sort of like you know bubbles on Instagram. A collection of men on Instagram probably would never happen, and it certainly wouldn't be bubbles of love hearts. So
No.
I think culturally we're struggling a little bit with men to collectively come together and talk about the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important. And you're saying about role models. We've had so many, people that you would have looked at as role models that suddenly you realise they got feet of clay over the part, and in this sort of revisionist type history that goes on as well. Lots of people that you would have sort of looked at. We tend to sort of forget that people who are role models need to be human instead of the way that they tend to be put on a pedestal. I think it's really difficult for guys. Obviously I've taught for years. A lot of the majority of them have been male, and certainly when I started teaching, part of the appeal of the guitar was something to do with the them searching for their own personality and something that they could work, would be them, part of who they were going to be. And even that has sort of disappeared somewhat because there seems to be within education, the education process, this marking out that, oh, no, you need to do this is not important. This is important. And it tends to be something that isolates, particularly for men. The people who are really good with their hands have been pushed to one side because it's, oh, we need, somebody to do computer programming or something like that. You know, you need to be good at maths. So all the people who would have been great at building things and, you know, all of that sort of stuff, they've been isolated as if they're not that important. And that seems to be a real problem for men because there is this thing, isn't there, within the male psyche that lighting a fire is something that does something inside you when you light a fire. It makes you feel like you've connected with something from your, you know, that really is a male thing. I'm not saying that women can't light fires, but you know what I mean. There is something within the male psyche, and a lot of those things that you would go like building something or hammering a nail in or something. It's just something about that physicality that
Well, I
seems
think it's
to,
an industrial change. My dad used to teach tech drawing, metal and woodwork, and they had workshops in the school.
yeah,
But then but then the lads were growing up, getting apprenticeships. At one point leaving school at 15,
yeah,
getting apprenticeships at 16, 17, and there was jobs for those sorts of skills. And you went into the shipyards. You went and all that stuff is gone.
yeah,
Um, and I think it's quite a hard thing. There is a bent physiologically to action. You know, he's a problem child in the classroom because he can't sit still for 30 minutes because he should actually genetically be running around chasing chickens and looking after goats. Put a chisel in his hand or give him something to do, you'll have his attention for hours on end. So there is if you like, again, statistically, the women are doing better than the boys at school, but
yeah.
maybe that's partly because the school curriculum is beginning to reflect the sorts of things that women are better at than boys.
I also think that the psychology behind teaching is better for women because they can sit down and talk, you know, instead of climbing up the furniture type of thing or, you know, wanting to run around the classroom, which is what would happen for young men. They just don't want to sit still. It's never really suited men. That's all about control or seemingly. Um, so yeah, so do you, do you think do you see this is, in a way, this is again another difficult question to answer. I mean, what would you say is the best way for that for, to connect for young men? You know, maybe with their fathers or just with society in
I,
general.
I think the parental connection is too short and burns too hot for the father son dynamic to be able to cope with everything.
Yeah,
And part of our culture is that's all most people have.
yeah,
So I think really one of the jobs of parenting is to put people in your son's life. So with women, with daughters as well, but particularly with boys, put other men in their lives that they can learn off.
mm,
Um, and I think having the example of older men behaving in a mature and sensible fashion, unconsciously sometimes they're just doing normal stuff, but they
yeah,
actually see two guys having a conversation about what's the best way to change a tire or what's the best way to cook a meal for 30 people because they've only
yeah,
got portions for 20. And having them be involved in those conversations, it normalizes everything. When you're getting the world coming in through television or off a screen, those all of those situations we have to remember. Day-to-day life does not make good drama.
exactly,
It
exactly.
the whole thing about television and film is drama is conflict. It's screenwriting 101.
Yeah,
Drama is conflict. Life is not a conflict. Life is about getting on with each other and being kind to each other and
exactly.
thinking about a wider world. That is really dull television.
Yes,
People
exactly. Well, you've done
find
a
it
lot of stuff
annoying.
about screenplays, haven't you, in your past, and you know this, as you say, it's not the Greeks had this, didn't they? When they did their dramas, they were so they weren't they were they were not normal. They were they were dealing with the most extreme situations um, imaginable, and that made good drama.
Yeah.
And that's absolutely it, isn't it? Um, and but unconsciously, whenever we watch things like that, even though we know those things are often not possible, even if it's something that's sort of based as real life drama, those situations are normally not possible. Somebody gets injured,
Yeah.
but they seem to be able to run away. Even, that type of thing, or they're involved in a fight. And it's like the old cowboy films, isn't it? The westerns where people will get hit with chairs and goodness knows what else, and they'll get up and brush themselves off. And you sort of think, oh, okay, that wouldn't normally happen. But it always looks as if that's normal. And drama is like that. But something unconsciously in us makes it seem as if it's real because we resonate with the thing, that we resonate with the
Well, I
excitement of it.
think one of the what's happened with the loss of community. We used to sit around campfires or village fires and tell stories about where we were from and the land. And do you remember the day that we were harvesting this and young Jack fell off the horse and blah 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 blah. Now those stories actually happen in the fire in the corner of our room, the television,
Yeah,
and they're universal stories. They're not our stories.
yeah,
We have such a yearning for story, and through story connection. Unfortunately, the stories that get told aren't necessarily the best ones to be told.
no, no, that's right. That's absolutely right. And that leads to the type of characters that you'd think, you know, well, I think this is actually a rabbit hole we can't go down. But if you think about the type of personalities that you get that come from a culture where everything's extreme, there's extreme stories, violence, or whatever. The type of characters you get from that must be very different. Personalities that you get from a culture like that must be very different from the personality of a culture that's more like the
Well,
one
I would
that you
bring this
said.
back to initiation because an initiated person stops being somebody who's looking to other people to provide for them and takes responsibility for their life and takes responsibility for the world around them. And we live in a blame culture where everything is always somebody else's fault, which tends to degenerate into, on a good day, a lawsuit, on a bad day, a gunfight. So, it's again, it's the lack of initiation with the loss of ceremony. The whole AI world is being run by uninitiated males at the moment. You wouldn't do
Yes,
all the things which are going on in the AI world if you
yeah,
were acknowledging proper boundaries and taking responsibilities for the consequences of your actions.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's also, I was going to say, the elephant in the room is the sort of the money that drives a lot of this. Obviously with culture from the media perspective, a modern culture. Um, and the term money men, because there's often that aspect of it. And you mentioned it right at the beginning that you were involved in the business world from a
I
sort of a,
think it's very difficult. If money was a personality, it's really hard having all the bad stuff put on you.
yes, because it's
What's
not all
money
bad,
done
is it?
wrong? Am I
Exactly,
to blame for everything?
exactly, exactly. But the point is that it's really because I agree with you. I would say that money is a neutral aspect. You could use it for good or for bad because it's just really an idea, isn't it? It's an energetic idea. But what happens is that where people get driven by the greed for money, where you get, like you were saying, ordinary life is not very good TV. It's not very entertaining.
Yeah.
So what is entertaining? And, how are we going to sell this idea across? It has to be geared towards the things that is sort of slightly sensational. I even see this obviously like in podcasting, right? I do this because I enjoy doing it. I'm not interested in putting adverts on. I'm not interested in the numbers of people who watch this. As far as I'm concerned, if one or two people, 10, 20 people see something and they're inspired creatively because of somebody's story and they see the world slightly differently, that's a valuable thing. And I've always thought about that with regard to teaching. Primarily, I'm teaching one person at a time, but that's enough. I don't need to be teaching 10,000 people on an Instagram thing.
I think part of what's happening at the moment is there's definitely, an Andrew Tate version of the world, which says a good man and a successful man is a bling man.
Yeah,
And it's all about pushing, to sort of, patriarchal in the bad sense of getting to the top of the triangle and stamping on everybody in the way up. Uh, and that is definitely a model of where money fits in and is probably, not healthy for the culture at large.
no,
But I also think that the alternative world has to take some blame for this, because you go to any festival and you hear the phrase late capitalism or
yeah,
capitalism in its dying throes, and I'm going, well, I've news for you. There ain't nothing around the corner going to replace it anytime soon.
no,
If you leave money to the money men, there's not a lot of serious discussion goes on at Glastonbury or Medicine Festival or all of these places going on. Well, how are we going to reshape the world? And
no,
what are we going to
exactly.
do apart from use money as a means of exchange? And how
Yes,
are we going to pay our pensions if we don't have money and don't have a 30% rate of return on an investment?
exactly.
This is all foreign language to most people, but these are all issues that need to be addressed.
The thing that really struck me about a lot of places that I've been to where people will make remarks like that, they're often quite comfortably off. And, really, it's like, well, I know there are places where people are experimenting in systems where they're not trying to deal with money. But often these people, I'm making a sweeping statement here, but often these people have made a choice to do this. They're not necessarily come from a society where there is no money. And I've taught in a lot of places where that some of the families that, particularly when I've been doing the charity stuff, where I go in and do a bit of songwriting and stuff like that, I'm dealing with kids, and that there is very little money, and they're having to deal with surviving. They are very different people,
Hmm.
very different people. Um, I think you're right. I think it's a really complicated subject, and it's about using resources, you know, in a way that suits everybody.
And it's very mucky, Vic, when it ekes into spirituality.
Yeah.
The church wants us all to be poor so we can give our money away to the church.
Yes.
Um, but success and money is deemed to be unspiritual. In some cultures, success is deemed to be a blessing from the gods.
Exactly.
And so the spiritual conversation around money sometimes is also tinged with envy. They've been
Yes.
successful and I haven't.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I
I'm
agree
just
with
sort
you.
of naming what I've seen in a few places. I'm not saying anybody's right or wrong, but sometimes the conversation is quite uneducated. I mean, there's a very profound, clever book by Yanis Varoufakis called Another Now,
Yeah.
where he tries to describe another way of living the world and making real estate different and making online shopping different. And it's one of these books you have to stop every 2 pages to work out what he said. But we actually need more of those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. 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 We do. Right. Well, that's been a brilliant chat as always, John. I mean, we could go on for hours with this because,
I've enjoyed it, Vic.
yes,
I've
well,
enjoyed it.
it's the rabbit hole syndrome, isn't it, with us? As soon as we start talking about something, we disappear down another
We
one.
need to compare bookcases at some point. We
Oh, yes, I know. Well,
probably
this
have
is,
quite a lot of snap going on.
yes. Well, this is just one part here. It goes round. I'm quite pleased about this. It's an entire library, which is wonderful.
Oh, well,
Right. Yeah. Um, yes, we shall have to do that at some point.
great.
Anyway, don't disappear when we say goodbye because we'll say goodbye properly after we've finished the
No,
recording.
thank you very much. I really
All
enjoyed
right,
it.
but great chatting again.
Great.
Catch
Cheerio
up
now.
soon. Cheers, mate.
All right, bye now.